How you doing? Welcome to the show. It's IB Nation Sports Talk. We're up and running along with Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. How are you tonight, Jesse Stiers?
I'm doing well. It's Monday, hardest day of the work week, in my opinion. Didn't have to do a whole bunch of mentally thought-provoking things, so that was a plus side. It's still very cold, and it's been kind of rainy and gloomy today over in my neck of the woods, so not really inducive to do much besides kind of stay inside.
Yeah, we had a pretty gloomy day most of the day here, and the sun is actually out right now. I don't know how long it's supposed to last, but you might be able to kind of see some of the rays cutting across my face here from the window on the side of my house. But glad to have everybody, whoever's here tonight, with us. We've got plenty to talk about. Brian Mason's leaving. Marty Biagi appears to be coming. Chancey Stuckey and Chris O'Leary both staying put at Notre Dame. We're going to get to all of that today. We'll also have some thoughts on Michael Mayer's NFL Combine, the Notre Dame women's basketball team's ACC Tournament. We'll do all that a little bit later in the show. I did want to mention before we kind of really get going today, we're going to have a little bit different show schedule this week for IB Nation Sports Talk because we're finally going to get to talk to Notre Dame's offensive newcomers Wednesday. It's going to be Wednesday night. I think it starts at like 5:45, which is obviously 15 minutes before this show usually starts for the live version of the show. So what we're going to do, Vince is usually here on Mondays, but because of the snow last Friday, the area high schools, their sectional basketball schedules were rearranged. So Vince is out. Of course, the dean of students at Penn High School, he is out at Penn's sectional championship game tonight. So hence, Jesse is with me. Vince is going to be here tomorrow, and we're going to do the mailbag show tomorrow because we are not going to have a show Wednesday so that I can go over to Notre Dame and take part in those offensive interviews Wednesday night, including Sam Hartman. He is scheduled to be there. So no show Wednesday. The mailbag is going to be tomorrow. And then Thursday, Vince and I are going to have some thoughts on what we hear from the offensive players. We'll hopefully have some audio that will be able to bring you thoughts from guys like Sam Hartman and others on Wednesday's show. And then, of course, Friday we'll still have rapid fire at 5 o'clock. So bottom line, mailbag tomorrow, no show Wednesday. Keep all that in mind as we go through the rest of the week. You got all that, Jesse? Were you taking notes?
I was taking notes. I was already a part of the back end of all this, the text messages, the group chat,
Right.
the
That's right.
gifts. All I know is I am where I am supposed to be on Monday at 6 p.m.
Yes. Now, you are actually coming back to South Bend this weekend, so you will not be on the Friday Rapid Fire show, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I'll be leaving
Okay.
Cleveland like right after work Friday, so I will be traveling.
All right. Sounds good. So that's what's going on rest of the week. By the way, here's a question for you. What is, I've heard that the ideal length, they've done, like some science on this, some background on this. They've, what is the ideal length of a podcast that you typically listen to? Because I've heard 30 minutes or less is actually like, that's what they recommend a lot of people keep it to. We don't stick to that by any means with the Irish Breakdown channel. So what's your thought?
I mean, so I have a variety of different. I don't listen to a ton of podcasts, to be honest with you, but the ones I do listen to, they have different purposes and they're kind of different genres. Like I listen to a comedy podcast that they have an episode. It's once or twice a week, and they go like an hour and 15 minutes, hour and 30 minutes. I have a podcast I listen to with Naomi a lot. It's called like CBS News or World News or something. It's some sort of podcast that gives you like a brief rundown, 25 minutes, 20 minutes of like the most important things that are going on within, the country that day, essentially. So but I mean, that's more informative and to the point. So that's part of it. And
Right.
then I listen to I don't really listen to a lot of sports podcasts, to be honest with you. So I think the only things I'll listen to occasionally are like Dan Patrick's show in the morning or Rich Eisen's show in the morning, and they go on for hours. So, I think that for stuff like this, sports, um, like a daily type of situation, I would say an hour is right around the perfect length. And then for stuff like I was talking about, kind of like your daily informative kind of news stuff, less in depth, is 20 to 30 minutes.
Yeah. Apparently, some people think that more than 30 minutes is too long, which I think is, is crazy. And that, again, like if you've listened to this channel, Salty says IB 4 hours, decaf, Joe Rogan 3 hours. I don't know. D Rock Irish 1 to 2 hours. And I'm kind of in that range as well. To me, 30 minutes is too short because I'm either listening when I'm working out, to whatever extent, or if I'm driving somewhere. I would prefer to put in a podcast when I'm driving than music. It kind of keeps me, a little bit calmer when I'm driving than listening to music. And I don't get the whole 30 minutes thing because my field, it's like, oh, you go past 30 minutes, it's too long. Who wants to listen to something longer than that? If you've got something that is more than 30 minutes, like it's an hour to an hour and a half or even 2 hours, you shut off your car or take out your earbuds or whatever, it automatically pauses. You can always come right back to it. So that's why I don't get the more than 30 minutes thing. I would rather have something at least an hour so that I'm not always, kind of searching for something. So
Yeah, and I like stuff too. I like the podcast for when I drive because it seems to make the drive go by faster. And with like music, to me, I kind of get caught up that like I know songs are 3 to 4 minutes, and so then it's like I need like 20 songs in order to get to an hour. But it's just a podcast; it just kind of keeps going. Oh, and
yeah.
that crime podcast that I sent you a while ago, those were like 45-minute episodes, but there was like a bunch of
Eh,
those. So
Closer to 30 minutes, actually. But, again, like if you're listening to a series, one rolls right into the next. But Anthony says the rapid fire segments are 30 minutes or more by themselves. That's true. And you should always listen to those.
those are the quick hitter, easy ones.
That's right. That's right. All right. I was just curious. To me, it's like start off with an hour and kind of go from there. D Rock says beyond 2 hours, it becomes a BS session basically from the chat comment. Well, that's I'm not gonna comment on that. But okay, so we've got the schedule for the rest of the week. Now, the topic of the day is more staff changes for Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. We thought that maybe it was done, and then Friday hits. Was it Friday or Saturday? Kind of all hell breaks loose. I think the initial report came out Friday. By Saturday, we found out what was happening. Brian Mason heading to Indianapolis. He's going to the NFL, and he's going to be the special teams coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts. He's a Zionsville native, which is an Indianapolis suburb. It's a little bit northwest of Indy. His wife is from down around the Indianapolis area as well. So going home basically for an NFL job. Your reaction, Jess, when you heard this, what did you think when you heard that Brian Mason was leaving after 1 year to head off to the Indianapolis Colts?
Yeah, so like when I first saw it, I was initially very surprised and shocked because I just saw, Brian Mason is going to leave Notre Dame, and that was really it. Outside of that, and so I was a bit confused too because of he had success, and so I thought naturally that like he would use his success as to kind of maybe take a leap to some sort of coordinator position next, or that's kind of how a lot of coaches climb the coaching ladder. Is you kind of start off at something like special teams, and then you do well and kind of prove yourself and you move up the ranks. But then when I saw what he's leaving to the Colts, and that he was from Zionsville, it just made sense. And it's so, it's just, I think it's always been a dream of his to coach in the NFL. It's very close to his family, his wife's family, stuff like that. And anytime you can take, your scheme from college to the NFL, I think it's a great opportunity. So, very excited for him, and it just makes sense. Like I said, at first I was a bit confused, but it definitely makes sense. So there's really no hard feelings on my end, but of course it sucks because we saw such a rejuiced and rejuvenated Notre Dame special teams unit, like a unit that it made you excited to watch special teams. It made you excited they were going to make a game-changing play, and that's honestly what they did kind of throughout the season. Is they gave Notre Dame, opportunities to score points on shorter fields. They were able to swing momentums in key situations. So it hurts losing that kind of game impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we go any further, my daily reminder, smash the like button, subscribe, rate, review, and all that great stuff, because it does help out, of course, the Irish Breakdown channel. But I guess I thought that I wouldn't have thought when they hired Brian Mason that he would be one and done at Notre Dame,
Yeah, exactly.
regardless of the success that he had. But at the same time, it's an NFL job. And on top of the fact that it's an NFL job, he and his wife both get to go home, and family thing, they've got family down there, obviously, because of the fact that they're there. So it's really, he was already pretty close to home, but it's a great situation. And like being in Cincinnati where he was before, he was closer to Indianapolis than he is right now here in South Bend, by the time, like just driving down Highway 31 and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very unique opportunity for him. But again, it's like you don't really think that a guy is going to come in and bada bing, bada boom, kind of check out that quickly. But he did such a great job at Notre Dame, and so that's why now it becomes a WTF situation, because like special teams were just an afterthought under Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. That's just the way it was, and it showed with how they looked. Now they were terrible in 2016. The special teams were, and the goal coming out of that year was basically just have special teams be a break-even situation instead of a liability. And that's what they were for 5 years under Brian Polian. They were solid but never spectacular under Brian Polian. Never had any blocks, never had any returns for touchdowns.
Yeah, and that was unfortunately just overall philosophy of, they didn't really want to try to make the wow plays. They just wanted to make sure that they didn't make or give up the wow plays.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like I said, don't let it be a liability. Don't give up the big plays the other way, the returns for touchdowns and stuff like that. Don't, don't fumble the ball on your returns. Don't have onside kicks returned against you.
Right.
Don't have a little squib kick that nobody falls on, that you're just standing there and looking at, boneheaded plays type stuff, the kind of stuff, again, that really blew up in 2016. You didn't see that kind of stuff afterwards. So to an extent, that was a success. But, guess what? Kelly goes to LSU for a year. He takes Brian Polian with him after a year. All of a sudden, it's a much bigger priority, obviously, as we found out last week, as Brian Polian gets demoted and they're going to, hire a new special teams coordinator down there. And, Mason, he took Notre Dame special teams from average to elite, not just above average, to flat out elite in one season. So, the block kicks are going to be what people remember the most, because he set a record with the 7, and they led the nation, shared the national lead with 7 block kicks this past season. And I heard someone the other day trying to kind of downplay that, saying, well, you put someone like Isaiah Foskey out there, of course you're going to block some kicks. It doesn't make you a special teams
But
genius.
think of all those players that Notre Dame had as starters that end up getting drafted. You just got to play your starters on special teams and make it an emphasis.
Yeah. But at the same time, Polian had some good, like Chase Claypool was one of the guys that, he was always on special teams. That didn't necessarily make the special teams great. They did have some other guys out there, but Like Brian Kelly stood up there and said, nobody's blocking kicks anymore. Well, it wasn't just Isaiah Foskey. It's like bigger than just block kicks. Notre Dame's they ranked 6th in special teams efficiency according to the FEI efficiency ranking. So it wasn't just that, like the hidden aspect of special teams is field position, where you start on average, where your opponent starts on average. They were in the top 10 for the first time since they started doing this metric 15 years ago. So there were so many little things that Brian made. It's like, it's one thing not to block kicks, I guess. It's one thing not to return kicks or punt, or fair catch all the time on punt returns. But my point is, like, there are a lot of little things that led to Brian Mason's units being not just above average, not just good, but an elite special teams across the board last season.
Yeah, it just felt like that Brian Mason was a guy who was, very innovative on the special team aspect. He didn't necessarily do the same thing every week, and that's important in special teams because a lot of special teams, I mean, just like anything in football, it goes off what's on your tape. Well, special teams is not out there as frequent as your offense or defense, so naturally there's less tape on your special teams, and then when you're kind of mixing up your scheme every week depending on what the opponent is giving you, it's hard to figure out, as the opposing team, what someone like Brian Mason is going to do. And I think that is what really propelled his success is his ability to kind of adapt every week, or his ability to kind of think creative every week and come up with something that was going to throw, the opposing special teams off.
Yes, that's right. And that, like, this was a guy who was sitting there, it's you can talk about, well, you only get, 15 minutes per practice or whatever, to practice special teams. But what about the rest of the day? Like, what about the day leading up to the time that they get to practice? What is the special teams coordinator doing? It's obvious Brian Mason was spending a lot of time in the film room, like
Right.
looking for tendencies on the other side, because that's part of what leads to the block punts and the block kicks. And it's like you spot something that you think you can take advantage of in protections that this team is running out there. And Brian Mason obviously had a very good eye for spotting that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that had to be his kind of strongest overall um, tool as a coach.
Yeah. So how big a blow do you think this is? Again, like people, like Holtz, Holtz, my beer says Notre Dame special teams unit will be just fine. Mason did an excellent job, but I had a feeling he would leave for the NFL. Biagi will do the job. So, like, how easy do you think this is going to be to replace? Because again, it's a situation where it's like special teams coordinator. It's not an intangible, but to a lot of people, it kind of seems like an intangible, I think. What do you think? How again, like how big a blow do you think this is?
No, honestly, I think that this is, in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty. It's not like how do I? It's not like as impactful as like if you had the best offensive coordinator in the game and they were leaving, right? Or like the best defensive coordinator. It's not to that scale, but losing someone that had so much success after Notre Dame was not very good to kind of below average in a lot of special teams categories leading up to this season. I do think it is a pretty big blow because I think that a lot of, or not a lot of, some of these games this season were affected by, Notre Dame's ability on special teams to make big plays. And you can't necessarily say, how much that swings a game, but it definitely helps. And it helps take pressure off some of your other units when your special teams can make plays like that. And I don't just think it's a plug and chug type situation, or else anyone could be a special teams coach and everyone would be successful at special teams. I think it takes a certain kind of driven characteristic. And a lot of what we were talking about with Mason is just constantly looking for weaknesses and wanting to be good and taking it seriously and taking pride in what he wanted to do. And it's hard to fill all of those things. So to me, it's a decent blow. Like it's a pretty good, hook to the chin, and you might have, stumbled over and fallen down to the mat a little bit. Like it's a blow in my eyes.
I agree, because again, we're not just talking about someone who did a pretty good job with special teams. He made them elite, and all the block punts. Again, that is what stands out. But there were so many other little things, with between the kickoff return, the kickoff coverage, and the punt units as well. There were so many different little things, and that translated into, they were number 5 in the nation with an opponent field, starting position around the 26-yard line. They led the nation with an average starting field position for the offense at their own 33.5-yard line. So it's like little things that you kind of take for granted that you don't think about. That it's like, again, the starting field position doesn't stand out like block punts and block kicks and all that kind of stuff, but it is a huge part of the game that can either help you or hinder you based on where you are. And you look at the fact that, in this metric, they ranked in the top 10 for the first time this year since they created that metric 15 years ago. And like, you look at Brian Mason, who was just like a maniac about this stuff, like he knew every little detail about this, and he could spit it out and recite it to you in just how good they were. Let me ask you this, because you've been on some football teams, obviously, and how much do you think, like, as we look toward Notre Dame, and we're going to talk about Marty Biagi and some of his pros and cons and stuff like that here in a minute, but how much do you think that just the head coach prioritizing special teams, like Mason is still what I would consider a special case, like Marcus Freeman knew that he was the guy to hire last year, and he hired the right guy and brought him in. But how much do you just think, like, when you look at the way Brian Kelly looked at special teams versus how Marcus Freeman looks at special teams and prioritizes special teams, how much difference do you think that makes right off the top, regardless of who you bring in next?
No, I think that makes a huge difference, and I think that is what would make me feel better about the situation is you have a head coach that is obviously going to emphasize the importance of special teams because, Brian Mason obviously didn't do all of his things completely alone, right? And so you have to have the kind of the backing, the resources, and everything that your head coach provides you. And I think that Marcus Freeman naturally having that and having proof or record of what Brian Mason did and kind of handing off to the next guy and say, hey, like this is, this is how important we take special teams. You need to, do the same effort, put in the same effort, take the same pride, because that's what the standard here is at Notre Dame. And
Exactly.
I think that
Here's the standard now. Now you
right.
got to
And
live
I
up
think
to it.
that's what Marcus Freeman is so great at as a head coach already is, using the vocabulary of standard. And this is how we're going to do things. And these are, these things, even if, not, I wouldn't use the word interchangeable, but if one man goes down or a coach goes down, this is the standard that I've created. And that, it's kind of almost a plug the next guy in or next man up type situation. And so, yeah, it might suck in the transition, or it might not, exactly get back to the level that it was immediately. But I have faith that Marcus Freeman will get it to that spot again, even if someone new has to come in.
Yeah, and I mean that's what happens when you bring in someone who's elite. Now, I would have liked to see a little, like a kind of a track record for Brian Mason. I would have been really cute. Well, one, we'll get to see what those special teams are like in Indianapolis when he goes down there. But like if he had stayed, how long could he maintain kind of that top 15 ranking for the special teams? Was it going to be a year in, year out thing, or did some things just go right maybe for him this year that helped create that? Like, how would teams potentially adjust to him as he went along? And those, like, was he showing tendencies, those kind of things? So that I would have been curious to see that. We're not going to get to see it now. And in the meantime, Marcus Freeman looks, he's got his guy in his sights, Marty Biagi. He he was a special teams analyst, of course, at Notre Dame in 2016. He was at Ole Miss this past season, Purdue before that, North Texas before that. He's also been a special teams coordinator at Southern University going back to 2012 to 2014. So just when you look at Biagi and what he's got, what do you think of him as the potential next special teams coordinator for the Irish?
Yeah, so you start to look kind of, at his track record. He started off, as a special teams coordinator at the FCS level. And then kind of his big kind of first break at the Division I level, Power Five, was Notre Dame as a special teams analyst. He goes to North Texas for 3 seasons as the special teams coordinator and had a lot of success there. You start looking at some of his numbers over at North Texas, and he had good numbers, right? And so I know that doesn't necessarily translate to the Power Five, and that kind of leads me into my next point of at Purdue he was a special teams coordinator for 2 seasons, and Ole Miss, so he got to that Power Five level, but didn't quite have the success as he did kind of at North Texas, and so you start to question: is that because of scheme? Is that because of the coach's emphasis on special teams down there? The overall kind of philosophy, that kind of stuff. And then you start looking into more of his background and what he's good at on the field goal side of things. I think that is where Notre Dame is going to see, excuse me, their biggest kind of jump because of his background as a field goal kicker, and looking at kind of the field goal kicking efficiency that the teams have had, as he's been there, and kind of seeing Notre Dame's struggles recently, with some of the kicking. So I think you'll see a lot of improvement in field goal kicking, in terms of blocking kicks, kick returns, stuff like that. I still think that he has a solid background, but again, it's hard because he hasn't had a whole like above average high end success at the Power Five level, and so that's what I'm most kind of questioning right now.
And that's it. It makes you want, is it like just because, okay, you had a pretty good coach, he goes to North Texas because of the level of competition you're playing. Maybe he had more success there, but then as you climb the ladder to Power Five jobs like Purdue and Ole Miss, and they're not quite as successful, because I'll just kind of go through, because I saw someone asking about it, like the best special teams units, as you mentioned, were at North Texas. They were in the top 20 in the FBS in block kicks all 3 seasons down there. And it's like, oh, okay. You look, like you hear that. And then based on what we just saw from Brian Mason, so it's like, okay, well, maybe it's not going to, drop off too far. Maybe they're able to keep that up. They tied for 11th in the nation in 2017. They were 19th in 2018 and 6th in 2019. Those were all at North Texas. That was one of his more successful departments. And then you mentioned the kicking as well, because he was a punter when he was in college at Marshall. And then going back to when he was in high school, he was a kicker as well as a punter in high school. So he has that background, which not a lot of special teams guys have. And like the fact that his kickers have converted nearly 84% of their field goals in his career, that's a really good sign, because Notre Dame kickers have done that just once since 80% since 2010. So starting with the kicking perspective, I think it's going to be really good to have someone with a kicking background, because again, it's like most of these kickers really only get that kind of specialization in the summertime when they're working with their own personal guys. Now they're going to have a guy with an actual kicking background. So I think for starters, that's good, like you mentioned, right?
Yeah, and I think also, to me, it's a lot harder to teach the techniques, or the technical side of punting and field goal kicking than it is to kind of scheme punt blocks and that sort of thing. At least in my
Mm-hmm.
eyes, right? Like I would be more happy with a guy who knows a lot about the mechanics of kicking rather than the mechanics of blocking punts, because I think studying tape and being dedicated and committed can bridge that gap a lot easier. But when it comes to, having someone who was a kicker themselves, understands the kicking like mechanics, and kind of seeing, the struggles recently of, Notre Dame punters and kickers, I would be very enthused about those things.
So then he leaves North Texas. He goes to Purdue for 3 seasons, or for 2 seasons. Then he's at Ole Miss for a season after that. And it's a little bit more up and down since then, like kickoff returns. His kickoff return units at Ole Miss this past season ranked 94th in the nation. At Purdue, his 2 teams ranked 129th and 64th in kickoff returns. North Texas, they were 27th, 22nd, 25th. So again, much better when he was at North Texas than the two Power 5 jobs. Kickoff coverage never, had a kickoff coverage unit ranked better than number 45. Ole Miss, they ranked 104th. Purdue, 122nd. North Texas in 2019, they were 109th. Had 9 kickoffs returned for touchdowns in 9 seasons as a special teams coordinator against them. That is a bit of a red flag because, again, it's like even if Notre Dame's units under Brian Polian were not spectacular, we weren't seeing those kind of things happening.
Yeah, and a big thing that I think you brought up, and what I was looking at is like we were talking about the FEI index, and I had to look that up. The Fremeau Efficiency Index, which is a college football rating system based on opponent adjusted possession efficiency, essentially a scoring advantage a team would be expected to have on a neutral field against an average opponent. It's just basically this guy came up with a way to statistically kind of formulate the whole special teams unit as a whole and the advantage that they give. And so that's what the FEI index does. This past season, Mason, like you talked about, finished, I believe, sixth. Ole Miss, on the other hand, finished 99th. So it's like,
right.
Again, that's it's kind of concerning to me. And so to me, you have to know, again, is it coach driven philosophy? Like, I don't know how important Lane Kiffin takes his special teams. I
Is
don't
it
know
the level of competition you're playing against
right, the
versus
level of
what you've got on your
competition.
roster?
It is, are you using, your full on starters? Or are you using kind of maybe your second string guys? I don't know. So that's again I know Notre Dame is going to have the emphasis on special teams and he's going to have the resources, but going from 6 to 99, that's a big difference. So
huge.
But again, this is if Marcus Freeman believes in him and Marcus Freeman believes in the standard that's being built at Notre Dame, that's really all we can kind of go off of at this point because again, 6 versus 99, that's a big gap. So hopefully we can see some things that'll make us feel better about that. And I think the kicking side of it is something that has me feeling a little bit better and not thinking about that 6 to 99 ranking.
Yeah, I think the kicking side, that is something that can become a lot more, efficient than where they've been. The fact that you've got someone who is so proficient with the kickers, but like you look at the special teams efficiency, again, 99th at Ole Miss, the North Texas units were all in the top 55. They were 53rd, 33rd, and 18th. But like you look at Notre Dame special teams, number 6, this past season in those efficiency rankings that you were talking about, they did that just once in the previous 15 years. So it's going to be real, but again, like we don't know at Purdue and Ole Miss how they prioritize starters being on special teams. We know that at Notre Dame, we saw a lot more starters on special teams. So like how much is that going to impact it? And again, it's a priority for the head coach. So how do we don't know what Jeff Brom and Lane Kiffin, how much they were prioritizing that kind of stuff and how much that could have impacted what Biagi was or wasn't doing there.
Yeah, and I just wonder you don't know like what was Marcus Freeman's criteria or like if there was criteria, like how obviously he's been at Notre Dame. I don't think that has much to do with it. He was at Purdue. I think that's kind of the bigger one that that might have kind of grown a connection with Marcus Freeman, but again, there had to be some sort of criteria that Marcus Freeman had, and he knows what he had at special teams. And I don't think he wants to take a step back in special teams by any means. So,
yeah,
we'll just have to see, I think. And I'm with Marcus Freeman kind of leading the charge and kind of giving the insight or the direction that he wants special teams to go. That's what I'm more overall concerned with, and I think everyone should be happier with. Is there's just a head coach that has a way stronger emphasis on special teams. So I think naturally that's going to help and take care of a lot of things.
I think that's what you have to lean into because again, when he hired Brian Mason just a little bit more than a year ago, Brian Mason was a good special teams coordinator at Cincinnati. but he was not necessarily an elite special teams coordinator. He became elite with what he did at Notre Dame this season. So, now I don't think he had kind of the valleys that we're talking about with Biagi. But again, I think that if the head coach is emphasizing it, he's willing to commit starters to it, which he's already shown that he is willing to do. I think that is a good sign, and that in itself should help out. All the other stuff are things that Marty Biagi is going to have to figure out. Just again, like in terms of his film study, tendencies, all those different things, and how all that is going to come in to play. What are some other things maybe that you think are the things that go into being a good special teams coach, having been around football for as long as you have?
I think the first and foremost thing is creating a mindset or a kind of climate that is excited about special teams, and brings kind of a fun dynamic to special teams. Someone it's like a competition, right? Like it's something that is you don't there's not many plays. It's an opportunity to kind of get more playing time, or if you're someone that's maybe potentially a starter, kind of go out and take advantage of some plays and maybe create some of those big, more kind of game changing type plays. Like a returner, obviously everyone wants to break one off and show off their speed like Chris Tyree did against Wisconsin, and take one back to the house. Or you want to be the guy who's blocking punts and potentially recovering it and taking it back for a touchdown, setting up your team with good field position. So again, I think that the number one thing is the coach themselves has to be bought in and create a climate or an attitude of we take this seriously and this is what we're trying to accomplish, but we could still have fun and make it competitive at the same time. And I think that ultimately brings out the best in players, and I think that's where you get starters interested in wanting to do it too, because it's such a challenge to be able to make these big plays on special teams.
Yeah, I mean, put the right guys in the right spots. It's not enough just to say, "Hey, we're putting starters on special teams." You still have to have the right starters on special teams or the right guys. It's like the mentality, and I like what you were talking about. Having fun with it and stuff like that. Regardless if they're a starter or not, you still got to have the right guys out there, and you have to have guys, I think, who are going to both give you max effort and carry out specific assignments. Like there's a reason that Brian Mason's units blocked all those punts last year. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't just because, well, you've got good players on those units. It starts with the guy in charge poring over film and figuring out those specific looks that the other team is giving him in their protections that they can take advantage of. And, like he talked about late, I think it was going into into the bowl game, about you fake punts and all that stuff. And he said, "Hey, we've had fake punts that we've got ready to go if we saw a certain look, but we didn't get those looks in the course of the game. So you're not just rolling those fakes out there to roll them out. There's still certain looks that you've got to get. And then, of course, the bowl game rolls around and we see some more of that. So, you know, I think, like you look at a guy like Jordan Botello or Bo Bauer, like not, guys who haven't necessarily been starters, but both big special teams contributors over the last few years. I think there's like a certain kind of mentality for some of those guys out there that you're going to put them, that you have to have out there. And I think it starts with that being able to sort of spot something unique in each guy that makes him suitable for going out there and being a guy who you can count on, to carry out those kind of assignments on special teams.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. And I remember, being in college, like being on special teams and getting that opportunity was a lot of where I was getting my playing time, because that's where a lot of starters, second string guys, mainly second string guys, are going to get a lot of their playing time. And so it's something that I always looked forward to, because I wasn't getting as much natural playing time as a starter, and it was something because of that reason that I took seriously and a lot of pride in. And so I'm hoping that that's kind of the same regardless of whoever the coach is. It's just the underlying kind of standard or principle of what special teams are going to be at Notre Dame. And I know not to compare anything, but I know that that there were guys, over the however many years at Ohio State where it's like that's kind of how you earn your stripes. Like that's kind of like the process to getting to be a starter is going through the special teams, having an impact on special teams, being able to perform on special teams. So I'm just I think it's a good thing for Notre Dame because I think that they have a lot of incoming, a lot of guys that are going to have a lot of talent, at recruit wise, and it should be fun to see those guys out there as some of these impact players.
Anthony says, let Marist and Kaiser play special teams, put Sneed and Ziegler in the starting linebacker positions. I'm sure that there are probably a lot of people who would agree with you on that, but Sneed and Ziegler still have to show in practice that that they can carry out their defensive assignments, play in and play out. Just like remember the Gator Bowl when we talked about Sneed a little bit, and not for all the right reasons because of a missed assignment or two. That I think those things are still coming together. And hey, that's why you have spring practice, right? To figure some of that stuff out.
Right.
TD for ND, would you be happy with special teams not taking a step back, measured in total, not just blocked punts? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, if they stay where they are right now, I think you're in great shape, don't you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I don't. I, there's no reason. Obviously, you never want the special teams to take a step back. I don't think it's realistic to have the same expectation of how many that they're going to block next year because they put up a pretty absurd number, and if I'm not mistaken, it was like a school record almost. So
It
like
was a school record.
to hold that as the standard, it's like you can't hit school records every year. So I think that kind of
Sure.
like I think that you need you would like to see a couple, but I don't think you should expect 7. Like, 2, 3, 4, something more on the more reasonable level. Yeah, but getting 7, 8, 9 every year, I think that's
Well,
where you
yeah,
create.
and that's what I think that's what he was saying. Would you be happy, with special teams not taking a step back, measured in total, as so like if we're talking about the average starting field position. Now remember, the average those block punts played into some of that average starting field position, because when you're not returning them for touchdowns, you're starting deep in the opponent's territory when you're blocking those punts. So that plays into those averages as well. So it's not just block punts here and over here, the average starting field position and all that stuff. One plays into the other. It contributes to the other with how that, all that gets calculated. But I mean, yeah, like, because then the other question that Anthony had was, would anyone trade the block punts for an accurate field goal kicker? I mean, that's a really good question. I agree with what you're saying, Jesse. We don't need to expect 7 block kicks every year, but if you're getting 2 or 3 along the way, and you've got a field goal kicker who's kicking at an 80% clip potentially all the time, I would take that.
Yeah, and I think that is that is where the trade-off is going to be. And I think that Anthony brings up a good point in what he was talking about when anyone trade the block punts for an actual accurate field goal kicker. I think that's more realistically where you're going to have to be at is you're going to trade in probably at 3 to 4 less block punts for maybe a more clutch field goal kicker. And that it can be just as important, especially in that stretch of big games that Notre Dame is going to have against Ohio State, Clemson, USC, like potentially one game possessions where you got to get as many points as possible. Like you can't be missing field goals after long drives that the offense have put together that could potentially take away some of that momentum from a big opponent whenever it might be. So me personally, I'm okay with trading that in, less block punts, better overall special teams units in terms of good starting field position, opponent field position not too great, more accurate field goal kicking, better field goal kickers over 40 yards, all of that stuff, better net on punt. And I think that's what you're going to see is maybe a little bit more better in punting efficiency, field goal efficiency, but a step back in the block punt category. And I think overall, as long as the special
Well,
teams unit as a whole is solid, that's what
I
I'm
mean,
more concerned about.
but the guy has averaged over the course of his career as a special teams coach, his units have averaged almost 3 block kicks per season. So again, like you're not necessarily hitting 7, and I don't think anyone should expect to get 7 because, again, like you'd be leading the nation every year or in the top 5 anyway. But if you're averaging 3 block kicks per season, I would take that, especially considering we didn't see any for 5 years. We were told for 5 years that nobody's blocking kicks anymore. And that's just the lazy approach to special teams to me. And that's why last year was so surprising.
Correct. And that is a very lazy, like, your goal should be to go out there and block one every game, whether it happens or not.
Right.
Sure, but you should still have every intent, and you should have done everything to prepare up to that moment like you were going to block a kick. And if it doesn't happen, I mean, not oh well, but it's better than than not trying and be like, well, it's just not going to happen, so we're not even going to try slash put together our best effort slash like really commit a lot of time and be elite at this. And I think that's
Exactly.
the difference in Marcus Freeman is he goes from very one end of the spectrum to the complete opposite end of the spectrum because of how intense and how much of a priority he puts on it.
Because again, to me, the blocking of the kicks is less about who happens to be on the units as it is the work the special teams coach is putting into scouting the film and finding those specific looks that put his players, whoever they happen to be, in the positions to get them. Because remember, like you had Bo Bauer get hurt, Prince Kollie got in there, and then here comes Prince Kollie with a block kick. So like athletically, sure, it's probably an upgrade, but again, it's about the look that you get and making sure your players recognize it's regardless of how much time you're spending on it on the field. Okay, this is the look. When we get this look, this is what we're doing, and we expect to get a block kick here. It's no more than, but again, it's about the work that the coach is putting in the film room to let those players know when they get those looks, this is when we're going to attack and how we're going to attack.
Yeah, and the confidence that Brian Mason instilled in these guys that, hey, this is the look. I promise you, if you hit this as hard as possible,
that's right,
and do what you're supposed to, we're
gonna
get these blocked punts.
Yep.
Just do what I tell you and give me 100% of your effort, and everybody's gonna win. And I think that was ultimately a big thing that Notre Dame's losing in Brian Mason is just the overall character, the intensity, and just how much confidence he instilled in his players and the way he got his players to constantly play at 100% at all times, regardless if they were a starter, a second string, whoever it was.
Yep. Antoine, if the new special teams coach can improve kick and punt returns where they can be a threat to score and stay even with block punts, they'll be more dangerous. I mean, I agree with that as well. I think that's still, as good as the special teams units were this year under Mason, the return game is still, I think, an area of growth for them, an area of potential improvement for them.
Let me ask you: would you trade in some of those block punts for some kick return touchdowns?
I would.
I think that's like some of my favorite days,
or even you get up around 50 more consistent. Not that you're always going to get around the 50, but even crossing the 50 is an exciting kick return.
Yeah, like I just remember all the stuff with Tom Zibikowski and just like how electric it was that he was going to bust one off at any given moment. And that was such a different like dynamic, and it gave other teams, something to worry about. And it gave, Notre Dame that extra boost of momentum or, whatever it might be. And I'm not saying that's what I expect out of the next guy, but just like that's just overall generation of big plays outside of punt blocks is really what's going to make a mark of a healthy special teams unit. Like, are you making big plays in punt block? Are you making big plays on punt return, kickoff, all that stuff? And so I think that what I'll be looking forward to the most is how is each individual unit impacted? Like, are they all getting better? Are they all pretty solid? And I think that'll be a good mark of, good special teams.
I concur. And TD4ND, I think everybody misses Rockets. Like, he's generational, man. But Zibby was awesome to watch as well. That was a lot of fun watching him on those punt returns. He didn't care about, he wasn't thinking fair catch. It was like, let's go when Tommy Z was back there. All right, Jess. We'll keep this going. Are you ready for rapid fire?
I am ready for rapid fire. We are. This is. It is about time we got into some rapid fire because we were deep into the special teams unit, and now it's time to have a little bit of fun.
That's right. So, which is the bigger loss for the Irish this offseason, Brian Mason or Harry Heastand?
Man, this is such a tough question. I'm actually going to go with Brian Mason because I think that he was younger. I think he had more kind of ahead of him, and I'm not taking anything away from Harry, but obviously Harry retired, and I think Harry was not a fan of the recruiting as well. And I just think there was a lot more potential down the road with Brian Mason and potentially what he could become. And so I was more excited about that. So if we're taking that in terms of losses, I'm gonna have to go with that because I was more a fan of what was coming in the future with Brian Mason.
Yeah, you kind of stole my thunder because I think that that is an excellent point. Just like I think when you hired Brian Mason as a special teams coach, you're probably thinking you're going to get at least 5 years out of him. With Harry Heastand, I don't know exactly what the conversations were like when they brought him out of retirement, but they did bring him out of retirement, and he came back. And so how long you were expecting to get out of Harry Heastand? I think that you were probably thinking that Brian Mason was going to be around a little bit longer, and and he's young and all the energy and everything that he brought to it. So I think that you were probably thinking you were going to get more out of Mason. He quickly became a hot commodity though in the coaching world. So, and then yeah, as D-Rock Irish just said, when you look at like the replacement value of Brian Mason and all those stats that we ran through, Mason is a huge loss. And while you're talking about guys who are both elite at what they do, Heastand with the offensive line coaching, Brian Mason with the special teams coaching, like it looks like you're probably going to at least get someone who's going to be a better recruiter, on the Biagi side replacing Mason, but there's a lot to be proven, with what he can do, but he has had some success in his background. And then you look at Joe Rudolph, I think that he is going to be a suitable replacement for Heastand. There will still be some drop off in the short term there, but I think that the guy, has a solid track record of coaching offensive line. Regardless of what he was as an offensive coordinator, he's got a really solid track record as an offensive line specific to what Notre Dame is looking for. So I think the drop off is I think the bigger loss is with Mason, the special teams coordinator, because of the whole package there.
Yeah, and it's kind of piggybacking a little bit off of what you were saying is, Harry Heaston is great, and he's going to take it, a little bit better, or not even a little bit, like better. Like he's just going to elevate, wherever he's at, he's going to elevate it when it comes to offensive line. But Notre Dame set a standard, and when he was here, yeah, he started that standard. But when they left, yeah, they tapered, but they were still very solid at the offensive line position. They still generated a lot of offensive line guys. He's kind of come back, reestablished that again a little bit, and I think Notre Dame is still going to draw in those offensive line guys. I like I said, I'm not saying that they're going to yes, they're going to get worse without him, but it's still like that worse is still a lot better than most programs in terms of offensive line production.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Fill in the blank. It means blank that Michael Mayer ran a 4.7 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine this weekend.
To me, it's I know it's supposed to be big news, but to me, it's not big news, and I'm not saying that it's irrelevant by any means. But I mean, there's guys, NFL tight ends that have run really good NFL tight ends that run between 4.5 and 4.7. I think as long as he can get that down to maybe like a 4.6 number by the time he has his pro day, I think he'll probably do the Notre Dame pro day and probably run the 40 again. To me, if he can get that down into the 4.6 range, it's completely, not even a problem. It's an afterthought. Does the 4.7 kind of hurt the eye a little bit? Sure. But I don't think, that again, that it's going to be a serious knock on him in the grand scheme of things. I don't think you need to be a 4.4 or 4.5 tight end just to be an elite tight end in the NFL. And again, as long as you're not, pushing like 4.8, 4.9, 5.0, I don't see it as a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it becomes confirmation bias for anyone who wasn't sold on Michael Mayer going into that.
Right. It
Like they
didn't
see
help
him
him out for the skeptics that were out
right.
there.
And I think it makes it dicey just in terms of first round. Like, is he going to be a first round pick? How much does this affect him being a first round pick? Like when I looked at sort of the not just the time but the way he ran, like he looked like it was a little bit harder for him just to get to that 4.7 than for some other guys, but like Cole Kmet ran a 4.7, but he was also 262 pounds. Michael Mayer was down about 16 pounds from his listed playing weight at 249. So he got that down there. Does he try to drop maybe another 5 or so pounds going into that pro day to try to get closer to a 4.65 or even a 4.67 or something like that? It's amazing though just how much a couple hundreds of seconds, affect what you think about
I
a
know.
guy.
Well, Rob Gronkowski ran a 4.68.
And that's like, I was going to run some comps here in a minute. Gronkowski was 4.68, so it's only 2 hundredths of a second
That's
better
what I mean. I feel like
than
it's just
Michael
like
Mayer.
the height of 4.7 is what gets people off. If he could just get that down to like 4.69, I literally think like 100th of a second better, and it's really not even a, to me it's not a big deal at all. But for everyone, it won't be a big deal if you can get that into the 4.6 area.
Right, like Anthony says, 4.7 wasn't great, but his running and catching the ball drills were good. You're right, but all anyone's talking about, whether it's Daniel Jeremiah or whoever it happens to be, the conversation is still about the 40 time. Because again, it's confirmation stuff. What the people who like Michael Mayer, and he interviewed great, like you hear there was a lot of good talk going into all the testing that was really good because of the fact that the interview stuff great, like when you listen to Michael Mayer talk, there's there's a lot to like about his confidence and everything else that he has. Here's some other comps. Travis Kelce at 257 pounds ran a 4.63. So again, slightly better. Gronkowski at 258 pounds, 4.68. Now, a lot of people didn't like or at least some people didn't like my Jason Witten comp that I was talking about last week because, again, like especially if you're younger and you didn't watch all of Jason Witten's career, like all you think about it is the end when he was heavier, wasn't nearly as quick, he had lost a couple steps, blah, blah, blah. Jason Witten ran a 4.65 at 264 pounds. So, like, think about, so like that is still my comp because of not just the speed, but because of the ability that Michael Mayer has as an actual pass catcher, the ability to get open, the ability to run routes, the hands that he has, all those different things. Jason Witten is still my comp for Michael Mayer. Like, do you buy that? Do you buy that comp, the Witten comp?
Yeah, I do buy it just because, again, I don't think that Michael Mayer is going to be this guy who is going to just like cut people off running routes, like break off, um, cornerbacks, safeties, and stuff. Like he's not going to create a lot of generation just by his route running. He's going to
Right.
use his frame, his big catch radius, his hands, the ability to catch a lot of different types of passes and just, get in front of people essentially. And that's, again, that was largely what Gronk did. Gronk wasn't a guy that was going to, burn past you or whatever. He was just going to use his size to get by you once he got the ball. And again, that's what Mayer's good at, getting, downfield straight line. I think he's very good at, breaking tackles, getting downfield and such a thing. And so, yeah, you look at Witten's 40 time, 4.65, kind of the natural frame, the good catching ability, and a lot of the stuff I just spoke about. I think that is, a good, comparison. And like you said, a lot of people get caught up with how Jason Witten looked towards the back end of his career, but the man still caught almost everything that was thrown to him. And that's why he
And
lived
by
in
the
the
way, he's
NFL
going
so
to the
long.
Hall of Fame.
Yeah, he's got.
So like,
That's why he lived in the NFL so long, is he caught just everything. He never dropped anything. He
right.
was a good inline blocker, and that's what Michael Mayer has proven himself to be over the last year.
Yes, that is exactly what I think Michael Mayer can be. He has the innate ability. He knows how to get open in certain spots, find spots on the field, break down the zone, whatever it happens to be. He can do all that stuff. and he can use that body size and what are pretty soft hands, to shield off defenders and make big. How many times did we see, him thrown to in double teams this year?
Well, yeah, and his background in basketball is going to be a large benefit as well because he knows how to use his body to go up in space with other. That's all basketball is going up and contesting, rebounds off the board, going up as a big man and scoring down low. You're going up against bodies, and that's what's going to help him in the NFL is and like someone pointed out that catch he made against Boston College, like that stuff that helps is knowing how to use his body in the air and be
Right.
able to, shield off and kind of honestly like he's like a wall. Like when guys run into him in the air, his body doesn't move, but the other person does move. And I think those are things that you just naturally can't teach. And a 40 time isn't going to be able to kind of show those things.
Yeah. And, I think the 40 time is only going to hurt him in terms of the first round. I think it makes it a little bit more questionable. Does he go in the first round or is he a day two kind of guy? But again, he's going to have a chance to at least improve on that 40 time at the pro day coming up here in a few weeks. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Florida quarterback Anthony Richardson has people talking about him as a possible number one quarterback picked in the draft after he had a good weekend at the combine.
It is chameleon like that Anthony Richardson has people thinking that he could go number one overall. And I say that because, a chameleon can kind of do different things to blend into its environment, right? And so that's what Anthony Richardson did at the combine. He had all these great athletic numbers, the broad jump, the vertical,
Big
the
40 time,
40-yard dash.
4.43.
Just showed you overall that he's this big athlete. Well, let me put a couple things to you. The broad jump and vertical don't mean much as a quarterback because you're not jumping for balls. You're not,
Exactly.
leaping side to side. Your job is to stand in the pocket and throw the ball. So yeah, the 40 time is good because we've seen Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, these type of quarterbacks, Justin Fields, who can create plays with their feet. Sure, that's great. But again, those other things just those don't add up what it means to be a good quarterback. And I think people are getting kind of caught up with this inflated, yes, he's a really good athlete, but flip on the game tape. The game tape is what I'm more worried about. And he had flaws in the game tape. And that's why going into this thing, he wasn't highly regarded because of his game tape. But, all of a sudden, because he has some good times and some good measurables, that people are just turning a blind eye and not looking at these things. So it's really baffling to me because, outside of that Utah game in the very first game of the season, it's not like he played incredible the entire season,
Yes.
And so I don't know. I think it's, again, very chameleon. Like he's kind of doing things to blend in and kind of take some spotlight off of his actual game tape.
And you knew that there was going to be somebody coming out of the combine who was going to get totally overhyped because they tested well in a span of a couple hours. And this is the opposite spectrum of what's going on with Michael Mayer. Richard, like a 4.43 40 time. Well, you're right. I guess it's nice if you can run a little bit as a quarterback, especially in the NFL right now. But you know what numbers I care more about than a 40 time for a quarterback? Let's start with completion percentage, which was 53% for this guy this year. And the fact that he threw 9 interceptions against just 17 touchdowns. He was a so-so quarterback for a 6-7 football team this year. They were 6-6 during the regular season. They went to a bowl game and lost, So like it's you can't get caught up in this. Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, look at the game film because they were still infinitely better than this guy. But there's no way that I would take him at the top of the draft, but he's still being talked about. Like they're talking about this guy, like the Lions could take him or, all the Panthers could take, still these teams in the top 10. This is not a quarterback I would take in the top 10 of the draft just because he ran a couple skills tests pretty well.
Let me ask you a follow-up question. What got more of your attention? The fact that Anthony Richardson had such great testing measurables, or that Will Levis puts mayonnaise in his coffee and is irrationally feared of milk?
From what I heard today,
And those aren't false, by the way,
Well,
everyone.
he claims that he only did that once. He said it's not a regular thing. He claims he only did it once. That is disturbing. Mayonnaise with anything is disturbing with me. Like that's just a non-starter with me if you're legitimately using mayonnaise that often. But yeah, that just sounded disgusting. Like
I
that sounded
gagged
something
reading
like
that.
Duke's Mayo is on the line and they're ready to give Will Levis, a sponsorship here pretty soon. I'm surprised he didn't have an NIL deal with Duke's
Right.
Mayo this season. All right, how about an established NFL quarterback? Derek Carr looks like he's headed to the New Orleans Saints. Do you buy or sell it as a good move?
I buy it as a good move for someone like Derek Carr. I think he needed a change of scenery, and get out of the Raiders organization. I buy it as in it's a pretty solid pickup for someone like the Saints, who kind of been reeling ever since Peyton and Breeze have left. So I think it's a potential good marriage, and I think, yeah, overall, I think it's kind of what both ends needed. Me myself, I'm not like sold on Derek Carr as like an elite or like a top 10 quarterback. And so as a franchise, I like, if I were a Cowboys fan and I was in the exact same situation, I wouldn't be happy about, oh yeah, we just went out and get Derek Carr. Like that wouldn't make me thrilled. And so yeah, so like to me, I'm just very much on the fence with it. But I do have some breaking news to add to this little question.
Okay.
Gino just signed a 3-year, $105 million extension with the Seahawks. So I'm actually more excited about that one because I think it's a good break for Gino. I think it shows, we've talked about this before. Pete Carroll, I think it just shows, his kind of overall brilliance. And, Russ had a lot of success, leaves and doesn't have success. I think Pete Carroll has more of that to do with, Russell Wilson. So I'm happy for Gino. And I think that that's a better use of money than Derek Carr. That's the only reason I bring it up, because I like that deal more than I like the Derek Carr deal.
It, the Derek Carr thing, I think it's good for him. For the Saints, you basically have a decision to make. Do you just kind of not totally tank, but are you willing to maybe stink for a year so that you can get another good draft, be in good draft position next year to try to rebuild what you have? Because they're one of those teams that, minus this season, they were consistently good for a long time, obviously, when they had Drew Brees and Sean Payton together, but they're in a rebuild type situation right now. But, so do you do that? Do you kind of, pluck it away with whatever you can find? Maybe do would they have kept, Jameis Winston around or whatever? They obviously decided that they're going to go with Derek Carr instead, because in the division they're in, it's a completely winnable division,
Yeah.
and so
It's like you have Olave, and if Michael Thomas can stay healthy at wide receiver,
right,
you have some legit weapons at the wide receiver.
right. So now you go out and you get Derek Carr, and at least for right now anyway, you've got the best quarterback in the division. So why not make a move like that if you think you can compete and go out and be in the playoffs? So I I think it's a decent move both ways around. The Geno Smith deal, I think you're absolutely right. Like we were talking recently about Russell Wilson throwing the shade at Pete Carroll and the GM up there and trying to get him fired and all that stuff. And we were talking about, like I think it was Michael Wilbon who said, he was trying to blame Pete Carroll for bad coaching, and that's why Russell Wilson is in the situation that he's in. Pete Carroll, I think, was saving Russell Wilson from himself.
I think he added a lot of longevity to Russell Wilson's
Yes,
career.
yes, absolutely. And just look at what he got out of Geno Smith, who was already, at the point in his career
He
where he
was
was kind
labeled
of,
a career backup.
yeah, exactly. And he became one of the better starting quarterbacks in the NFC last year. So good for Geno Smith. I'm glad for him. Like I had even heard, like we were just talking about Anthony Richardson, like maybe a place like Seattle would be a good place for him. Like when you look at what Pete Carroll did
Yeah.
with Geno Smith
Unfortunately,
this
that's not happening now.
You wouldn't think so with what they're going to give Geno. So good for Geno. It worked out. And good for the Seahawks as well, for that matter.
Yeah. Last follow-up question I have on this. I just think that this kind of has a lot of implications. Do you think that this kind of, solidifies what the Jets are going to be doing at quarterback? Do you think it's kind of Rodgers a bust at this point?
It seems like it. I think they're going to try to go all in. I'll be curious to see what they're going to be willing to give up to potentially try to go out and make a deal. Like, if they think that they can compete, I don't know what else they're going to do, because Derek Carr and Aaron Rodgers were the only two names that you really heard there, and the Jets desperately need a quarterback. So now I'm getting a critique from Irish Falcon. Sean, your video presentation needs improvement. Your hat casts a shadow on your eyes. Your camera angle needs to be brought up level with your chest. See too much of microphone.
Great show, though.
Well, there's only so much I can do, until Brian is willing to invest some money in my setup here in my room.
A full studio.
Yeah, that's right. There's only so much I can do here. So we'll go with what we've got for now anyway. But I appreciate your feedback. It's good to know. Jesse, next question. Let's move on to some basketball. Scale of 1 to 10. How confident are you in Notre Dame women's basketball's chances to host and advance in the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, so going into this weekend, Notre Dame was a top, or a 9 or 10 kind of national ranking, and we had this discussion last week that, me personally, I think that they should have been a 2 seed going into the weekend, and kind of figuring out things from there. Considering Virginia Tech's ahead of them, UConn's ahead of them, they beat those teams head to head, but we won't get too much into that. And so I don't think that losing in the semifinal after a very strong regular season without your top player, I don't think that should hurt you. And I think that they should be a lock for a top 16 team in the country. And I believe that they should host. And I have, every inclination that they will do just fine in those first 2 games, because, essentially you're getting to play around a 14 seed. And then after that, I think you get down to like a 7 or an 8 seed. And I have faith that they can get out of that round. I think the round of 16 is where I would get to be a little bit more worrisome, essentially. So I have a lot of faith that they're going to host. I think I'd give it a 9 out of 10 that they're going to host and win both of the games that they host. And I think, that with the potential of Miles being out for the first game of the tournament, getting to be on your home court will kind of ease some of the pressures or things that might have come with that. And I just think the Louisville situation was a bad situation for Notre Dame to be in. You turn the ball over 22 times, you shoot 31% from the floor. You're going against a Louisville team where it meant a lot more to them. This is the 3rd time that you've played them in a span of like 20 days. High emotions. You're without your best player. Just a big kind of formula for an overall letdown. And that's what happened, but they can wash it. This is the ACC tournament. It's not the NCAA tournament. And again, I think they're going to be just fine in those first few games that they get to host at home.
Yeah, 3rd time in 16 days to be exact. Chi-Town is not, not in there right now.
They beat a very solid NC State team in the quarterfinals. Yeah, if they play like that, it should be fine in those first 2 games of the tournament.
It's a 9 and a 9 for me. 9 that they host, 9 that they advance. I'll at least leave wiggle room, that one, for whatever to happen. And I know that there are some skies falling people out there, like Chi-Town apparently, who think that because they lost a lopsided game to Louisville in the ACC semifinals, it's the end of the world. Because to answer some questions about Olivia Miles, we still don't know at this point, what's going to happen with her. And, how there's some people who think, well, okay, they figured out how you guard Sonia Citron, the day after she scored 28 points, and then, right after she had scored 27 against Louisville before that. The last 2+ months, who have you played? All your teams in the conference, right? Teams you play every year, which means that they're more familiar with you than, when you get to the NCAA tournament. And in Louisville's case, again, 3rd time they played in a 16-day stretch. And guess what? Jeff Walz is a pretty good coach. You may not like him, but he's a good coach. And he went to the Final Four last year. And he had an answer that he didn't have a week earlier when Citron lit him up for 27 points. But there's a lot of familiarity when you're playing these conference teams. And again, like Louisville thought Louisville's players, I was sitting there courtside. You should have heard the stuff they were saying. They thought they were going to beat Notre Dame on their home court on senior day when Citron lit them up for 27. Didn't happen. And they had a burr under their coats there coming into that game in the semifinals. Notre Dame was one of 6 top 10 ranked teams, by the way, in the country that did not get past their conference semifinals this past weekend. Indiana was number 2 in the nation. They lost. Utah, number 3 in the nation. They lost to an unranked team in the Pac-12 quarterfinals, Washington State, that was the number 7 seed that went on to win the Pac-12 tournament. Kansas men, like spin it to the men's side, they lost to Texas this week, and they might end up with the number 1 overall seed in the men's draw. Like you said, you get to the NCAA tournament. 1, teams don't have the familiarity with you. 2, you're going to play some lower seeded teams right away. And then even, like those next games, like they're a number 4, you get a 13, then you get a 6 or 11, or, like if you're a 4 seed, you get a 5 or a 12 in the next round. So I'm still really confident, with or without Olivia Miles, that this team is going to host and that they will at least get to the Sweet 16 in the tournament this year.
Yeah, and it's such an advantage to play those games on home court, and it's such an advantage that if you're going to be without your best player potentially, that you get to kind of have a crack at it before. Not that every game doesn't matter, but you get a crack at it before you get down to the 16, and that's where it really gets tight. And I'm not saying that they should overlook any of these first games by any means, but it's a way to kind of gain momentum going forward with things that I talked about: home court, the advantage of having a really strong regular season and getting some of these lower seeds, and rolling into the games that increase in magnitude as you go down. And listen, it's like the ACC tournament means a lot more for, or not even ACC. These conference tournaments mean so much more for so many different teams for so many different reasons. Like
Right.
Louisville needed to have a good tournament, potentially, win it all to even get a berth to the NCAA tournament. So it's just like there's a lot more underlying
Well,
things going
they
on.
were getting in, but they had a chance to host, like
Right.
had they won. Now their chances to host, they might still have an outside
I
chance,
guess what
but
I'm
not
saying is
nearly
when it
as good.
comes to these
Yeah,
postseason tournaments, a lot of teams have ulterior motives. And
right.
for a team with Notre Dame who's trying to figure out how to, play without their best player, they had other things kind of going on. And so I just think it was a bad formula on the wrong day, essentially.
Yeah. And that's how you spend the next couple of weeks now. You talk about,
You get you
whether
get some rest now.
yeah, and whether or not Olivia Miles is going to be there. And I agree with what a lot of people are saying. I mean, with Miles, I do think that they are not even a dark horse, but would have a really good shot at making it to the Final Four, depending on what the path happens to be. Without her, I still feel like they're at least a Sweet 16 team, and maybe still with a chance to make a little bit deeper run. But obviously, the deeper you get in the tournament, the better teams that you're going to play. And you need a player like Olivia Miles, who is the runner-up for ACC Player of the Year. Mark Hughes had a question earlier. Why is it so hard to teach Ebo how to take the proper angle and go up strong? Also, since they have trouble breaking full court pressure, why don't they inbound the ball right away? I mean, again, I think the problem that they had with full court pressure has had more to do with, like, Louisville just had a great defensive game plan, and they were tenacious, tenacious D, out there. That's what it was Saturday. They had a great defensive game plan, and they attacked Notre Dame all day long. I still think whatever problems they had Saturday, you can write off to who the opponent was and the experience, with that opponent. As to Ebo, I'll just say this: she's a 5th-year player, and she's played at, this is the 3rd program she's played in, Penn State, Texas, and now Notre Dame, and she's putting up career numbers since she's been at Notre Dame because Carol Owens is an excellent post coach. So, are there, some things that you'd still like to see differently from Lauren Ebo? Yeah, but she still gives them, really quality minutes as much as she can out there. They're and again, she's having the best numbers of her career. So I don't know how much more there is for her to go from there. You would like to see her, kind of finish a little bit stronger at times around the basket. That's the one thing that she's probably still working on a little bit. But she's coming down to the stretch drive of her career now, because whatever game that they would lose, then that'll be the last of her college career. Let's flip it to the men's side. Men's basketball plays Virginia Tech in the first round of the ACC tournament tomorrow. Scale of 1 to 10, what chance do you give them to win?
See, this is a tough question. Again, it's just a matter of, is it going to be the team that came out and stomped Pittsburgh, or is it going to be the team that came out and got stomped by Clemson immediately the game after? It's like, how do you go from one end to the spectrum like that? But then, you start looking at Notre Dame played Virginia Tech almost a month ago, and they lost 93-87. Pretty close game. It's going to be the tournament. I think Bray, I think the one advantage you could give Bray in a season like this is he does have some of that big game. He's coached in big games. He's coached in a lot of tournaments. He's coached in the NCAA tournament. I think that combined with, that they played him well the last time, and the combined that it's Bray, and I don't think that he's just going to go out like this, potential dud in the last game. I actually give them a high chance, and I'm probably, all things considered, going to put a little bit money on this money line for Notre Dame to beat Virginia Tech. So I'm actually pretty confident. I'd say I'd give it overall an 8. I don't know if I'm a 9 or 10, but I'm gonna stick with the 8 just because
you're going to talk yourself into actually betting money on Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's high, high reward, high risk, high reward in this situation.
All right. Well, you're on a little bit of a roll right now. So I don't know. True. Austin says Irish by 100. I don't know about that. I have the feel like this first round game, I don't know why I feel confident, but I do. Again, like maybe it's the, ride or die coming down to the final days of Mike Bray's career, because again, like they obviously have to win the whole thing at the ACC tournament to get into the NCAA tournament, which and they're not even going to go to the NIT if they lose out on this thing. So the next game Mike Bray and the Irish lose is going to, that's going to be it. And they caught that juice when they were playing that last game at Purcell last week against what was supposed to be one of the best teams in the ACC. So I think if they can get up for a moment like that, there's not going to be quite the same energy in the building. But,
you mean to tell me that 14 versus 11 is not going to be the sellout on a Tuesday
on day
night?
One? That's right. At least it's not a noon game. At least it's at 7 o'clock.
They're at least putting them in prime time, or letting them play in prime time, I should say.
So I guess, I'm not going to go quite on the same limb as you, but I'll at least go 50-50. I'll give them a 5. That's probably my confidence. But, let's see where it goes tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I bet we both have more confidence than Vince at this point. I'll guarantee you that.
Yeah, Vince is already plotting on their loss.
Irish Falcon says I have a good voice for broadcasting. Well, thank you. I've done some broadcasting over the years, so give it my best shot. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for tonight. A lot of good stuff tonight, Jess.
Yeah, I think kind of closing
Monday strong.
Yeah, closing thought for me on this kind of whole takeaway is Brian Mason leaving is crappy, but I think that Marcus Freeman has set a standard going forward for what every unit and is going to look like under his kind of regime, and that gives me a lot of confidence. And the fact that that there's a lot of overall interest from these assistants is, I think, something that we're going to have to get used to if Marcus Freeman's success is going to lead to assistant success, and it's going to lead to assistant poaching. So if you want Notre Dame to be successful and you want Marcus Freeman to be successful, these are the things that are going to happen along the way. And I think it's only a respect or a nod to someone like Freeman. He's only been a head coach for 1 year, and he's had, potentially 4 coaches poached off him, one being Alabama and, one being some of these NFL teams. So I just think it's something that we're going to have to get used to, that comes with, a high level coach and a guy that is going to be successful.
And in the meantime, of course, the coaches most people want to leave are still here, but
right.
that's for another day.
Unfortunately, how it goes.
All right, Jess. Great stuff tonight. Thanks everyone for being here. We will talk to you mañana. Remember, it's going to be Mailbag Tuesday this week. No show on Wednesday because I'll be over at Notre Dame doing some of those offensive newcomer player interviews. Jess, I will talk to you later, and we'll talk to everybody else tomorrow as well on IB Nation Sports Talk.